What are some ugly facts about famous and well-liked people of history that aren't well known by the public? From Rotten.com. When Steve Jobs worked at Atari, the company was working on creating the arcade game Breakout, which required 80 integrated circuits, ICs. The less ICs there were, the cheaper the games would be to produce. So Nolan Bushnell, Atari's president, offered $100 for every IC that could be knocked out of the design. Jobs' brought was the challenge, and over 4 days and nights at Atari they put together a design that only required 30 ICs. Bushnell gave Jobs his $5,000 bonus, which Jobs split with Wozniak by telling him it was a $700 bonus, giving him half, or $350. Was delighted, but years later found out the truth, and cried. If I recall correctly, this was shown in the movie Jobs. Honestly, that movie made me hate Steve Jobs. What a crappy guy. Dr. Seuss cheated on his dying wife, then married the mistress after his wife killed herself. She left a really sad suicide note. This isn't ugly on her part, but the people who perpetrated it. Audrey Hepburn was famous for that 20-inch waist of hers, but she actually credits it to when she was a teenager living in Nazi-occupied Netherlands and was starving to the point she was eating tulip bulbs and trying to make bread out of grass. Her older brother was put into a labor camp while her cousin and uncle were executed. Moreover, during this period Audrey was still dancing at the local ballet studio, where she and the other dancers would hold recitals where there was no music, no clapping, and the curtains were drawn so as to not bring attention to the activities. These dancers did this as a way to raise money for the resistance. Cole Malone, while a 20-year-old college basketball star, fathered a child with a 13-year-old. He has denied the child throughout his life, even though there is a large amount of evidence pointing to him actually being a sleazebag. Cowboy Cole had a bunch of kids. He sort of picked and chose though which ones he wanted to meet or acknowledge. Wing Chun master Ip Man is portrayed in movies as almost like a son. In reality he was an adulterer, opium addict and out of control gambler. His second son was with his mistress, and his senior students would hide the money he received from students because he would collect it and immediately go and lose it gambling. Great at kung fu though. Ip Man stuff is all legend. He's famous because he taught Bruce Lee as a child in 1957 and Bruce mentioned him in Western interviews as an influence. So in the late 1960s and early 1970s, hundreds of people went to the burbs of Hong Kong to be taught by Ip Man for a few months, moved back to where they came from, and opened up schools that said they are disciples of Ip Man, the legendary teacher of Bruce Lee and disciple of descendants from the legendary founders of Wing Chun, a form of kung fu. The real story is that Ip Man was primarily a police officer in Fujian most of his life and fled to Hong Kong as a 56-year-old man. He lived in poverty and taught a bunch of restaurant workers kung fu for donations. He eventually was able to open up a school in a burb of Hong Kong that was moderately successful and taught a young Bruce Lee for 1 year about 8 years after he quit being a police officer. The Bruce Lee fans students that made him and his family wealthy in the 1970s had a very elderly, drug-addicted Ip Man whose classes were primarily taught by family members or senior or former students. There are literally thousands of similar teachers with much better backgrounds in China and Hong Kong that trace their lineage back to the legendary founders of Kung Fu, but they never taught Bruce Lee. In my town there are 3 Kung Fu gym studios. They each have an owner that traces their training back to someone that used to train with Ip Man and have pictures of Bruce Lee all over their websites. The legend of Ip Man is marketing spin for Kung Fu teachers, and in China he is now an action hero. James Brown was a major drug addict and prone to violence. He beat his third wife with a lead pipe and shot at her, assaulted a police officer after a high-speed car chase, charged a repairman that came to his house with a steak knife, and allegedly raped one of his female employees. Dr. Dre beat the crap out of a reporter at a party just for interviewing Ice Cube after he left his group. I can only hope she didn't settle for the 90s chump change he had then, in comparison to the Beats by Dre money he has now. The former king of Spain killed his little brother in a suspicious gun accident. Also, one of his mistress was found dead and the autopsy showed she was pregnant. There are a lot of shady facts surrounding him, but the Spanish media haven't said anything about them until recently. current king of Thailand killed his reigning older brother to become king. Story goes, older brother, who was king at the time, was lying on bed playing with loaded gun. Younger brother, current king, walks in. Older brother playfully points gun at younger brother and says, "I could kill you right now." Younger brother takes gun from older brother without knowing that it's loaded, points it at older brother and says, "And I could kill you." Older brother says, "Do it." Younger brother pulls trigger. This has adverse effect on older brother's ability to remain alive. Younger brother freaks out, runs to mother's room elsewhere in the palace to find her screwing a random dude. Random dude and two servants who were in the older brother's room and saw the whole thing get executed for the whole thing. Xerxes was a much fairer and more progressive ruler than Leonidas. 300 makes it seem like the Spartans were fighting for freedom, but they heavily relied on slaves. They relied entirely on slaves for everything but soldiering. That's why every Spartan was a warrior, because that was the only way to keep all their slaves down. Alexander Graham Bell didn't invent the telephone. He stole the patent when he was working in the patent office and the real inventor died before the court case. Newt Gingrich twice divorced a wife as she lay ill in hospital with cancer. Newt Gingrich has run for office as a family man. Of course he's a family man, he's had more families than anyone else. Miley Cyrus's dad paid the higher-ups in charge of Hannah Montana to put his daughter in the show. She auditioned, but they told her no. They offered her a guest appearance. She threw a fit. Daddy paid them to put her in the show as a lead for the first season. For some reason the show took off, and so she got to keep doing it. Source: went to elementary middle school with her and her brother, and was friends with her brother. He was also a spoiled brat who threw similar fits. People who are lucky enough not to remember Achy Breaky Heart. During World War II, Churchill refused to send shipments of grain to India, which was suffering a famine based partially on heavy British exports, and instead stockpiled them in areas that had enough. 3 million people died. According to Churchill, it was their own fault for breeding like rabbits. Al Sharpton falsely accused a white New York prosecutor of rape and abduction of a black teenager to gain his fame, destroying the career of the prosecutor and the teenage girl. He was successfully sued for defamation but let others pay the $345K in damages. Problem is, Al Sharpton is not a well-liked historical person. Although Barney is well known for entertaining children, he is actually considered one of the greatest apex predators to have ever lived and spent majority of his time killing others from his own species. There's even recent evidence of cannibalism. Jerry Springer was once mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio. He resigned after he was caught with a prostitute, but he managed to get re-elected. Some say it was because he was honest about his mistake and didn't try to act like it didn't happen like most politicians do. Bono goes to parties and says he doesn't want any pizza when they are putting together the order, but then he has 3 slices anyway. I'm not a vampire. I'm a night owl with a terrible garlic allergy. Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State during the presidency of Nixon, conducted an illegal war in Cambodia during the Vietnam War by diverting B-52 bombers to that region. The pilots didn't even know what they were bombing and it would not be reflected on their flight logs. This illegal war arguably laid the foundation for the instability and mass murders that followed. He also supported the military coup of 1973 in Chile, which was spearheaded by the dictator Pinochet. It also caused a famine that killed around 500,000 people if memory serves. Judith Barcy, the voice actress for Ducky from The Land Before Time, was killed with her mother by her father in a double murder-suicide. Elvis Presley was technically a pedophile. Imagine a 25-year-old rock star freaking a 14-year-old today. People would lose their crap. Charlie Chaplin also fricked a bunch of kids, it just wasn't illegal at the time. Source: Tiger and Kylie. The only reason that George Washington was able to cross the Delaware River is because he lied to the troops. Their year of service was up, so Washington said that Congress was willing to give a raise to anybody who re-enlisted that day. Nobody got the raise. Yeah, I'm gonna go say it was worth it. Barack Obama is known to eat all of the chocolate in a carton of Neapolitan ice cream, leaving only vanilla and strawberry for everyone else. That's why he's my hero. Motherfucking love vanilla and strawberry ice cream. Frick chocolate. Charles Dickens' life took a major turn when, in a move that would have been perfectly characteristic of the worst of the most callous, manipulative villains of his own stories, he left his wife and 10 children after falling in love with an 18-year-old actress he'd become smitten with. He remained with the girl until his death. Granted, reports were that it had been a bad marriage, but he also had a record for being smitten with his own sister-in-law, if I recall correctly, during his marriage, until she passed away, to the extent that her death left him devastated at age 25. Just too bad he never had that kind of attachment to his own wife, I suppose. Roman Polanski, director of some amazing films such as Chinatown, Rosemary's Baby, and The Pianist. He drugged and raped a 13-year-old girl, and then fled the country to avoid jail time. 138 people in the film industry signed an open letter in his defense when he was arrested in Switzerland. That's like the only thing I know about Roman Polanski. Michael Jordan is the absolute nastiest person, so mean and arrogant. I worked for a local livery service that catered to only superstars and professional athletes. We had a few mean clients, but they were super rich and entitled. However, Jordan took mean and nasty to another level. His wife Pietro and him used to schedule rides every other day. They called, yelled, belittled and degraded the operators who took their reservations. One woman was reduced to tears because he got mad at her and he kept calling back yelling at us. I have even seen Jordan completely ignore children and tell them to get lost. His kids are also mean, vile people. The apple did not fall from the tree there. It is sad because he is a basketball legend. However, really is an evil man. I have so many Jordan stories, but he isn't worth my keystrokes. On a more positive and completely random note, another famous person we catered to was Ric Flair. Now, growing up Rick was a man, but around town he is still considered a celebrity, but at D-list, he is a raging stone cold alcoholic. However, he may be a drunk who couldn't pay his tab, but he was the absolute nicest man ever to call our service. Many times our owner would let him slide just because he was so well liked. Before he took a nosedive into alcohol he was a good customer, but as the years rolled on he completely changed. A friend of mine works at a really high class golf course in South FL that rents out villas. MJ and his people rented one for a weekend and completely destroyed it. I mean, TVs ripped from the walls, holes everywhere, pictures and furniture trashed. The sad part is that they had done it once before and had already been warned by management about it. Not that it mattered to him, but he paid big time for the repairs and has since been blacklisted from staying there on the grounds ever again. Said he didn't even apologize or care. Told them to bill him for whatever needed to be repaired. Bono's massive worldwide charity only donates about 1% towards actually charity. I mean, we had a front page post last week about 4 much smaller charities in the US being run by the same family and only donating about 15% to charity, and we had our pitchforks out. I saw a documentary on John F. Kennedy where someone said that on parties, vacations and social functions, he'd always invite one unpopular person to make fun of them behind their backs. Knowing this made me think he was probably kind of a jerk. He was like the Regina George of presidents. When Mark Wahlberg was 15, a civil action was filed when he threw rocks and shouted racial slurs at black kids. When he was 16, he approached a Vietnamese man on the street and knocked him unconscious with a stick and yelled, "Vietnam freaking crap." Later that day, he attacked another Vietnamese man, punching him in the face. For these crimes, he was charged with attempted murder, but only served 45 days. He has recently tried to get a pardon for his crimes, which has stirred up a lot of controversy. People seem to forget Mark Zuckerberg screwed everyone involved with Facebook out of billions of dollars. I'm not sure if anyone has forgotten that. They made a whole movie about it. Barack Obama changed the rules of combat to include the clause that anything killed by the US will be considered a militant unless posthumously confirmed by a reputable source, and male from 1460 will still be considered militants without any need for further proof. TLDR systematically allows murder. I see all the time Reddit fawns over Mr. Rogers as if he was perfect, but the thing that nobody ever brings up is, just kidding, the guy was pretty much Jesus. From a great book, Mother Teresa was not a friend of the poor, she was a friend of poverty. She said that suffering was a gift from God. She spent her life opposing the only known cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women and the emancipation of them from a livestock version of compulsory reproduction. Christopher Hitchens. Mother Teresa died a super wealthy woman. She guilt-tripped business into giving her free stuff. Apparently she outright refused to pay for air travel and always managed to get free fares. Christopher Columbus ran a child sex slave business and his son was the first African slave trader. They were both kind of a dong. Oh, it got way worse. Jared Leto pulled up to my friends in a limo once as they were leaving a bar and asked them to get in. They did, and he pretty quickly started groping my friend. She asked him to stop, and he got super douchy and said, "I guess you don't know who I am," and told the driver to pull over. He then kicked all of them out of the limo in a bad part of town. I know this isn't the greatest story or the most historical figure, but Dickhead is a huge actor and I'd rather read this than GH and he and Mother Teresa were dongs 20 freaking times in one thread. Can't stand that guy. He thinks he is some kind of musical god, but I've had the displeasure of seeing him live twice, and all he does is run around screaming into the microphone and having confetti blasted in the air while a super high production music video plays on a giant screen. People are so brainwashed by him. The second time I saw him, he was running through the crowd and people were literally jumping over their seats trying to touch him. I can admit that he is a good looking dude, and his music isn't terrible when it's on the overproduced tracks, because like I said, he sucks but live, but I don't see how he has this effect on people. It's very strange. Cristiano Ronaldo, world's biggest soccer star, impregnated a waitress during a trip to the US and paid her off to hide her identity and never see her child again. It's well reported and his family even said, "We don't want this child to live in poverty." A friend of a friend grew up in the village near where Paul McCartney lives, and basically the village makes a ton of cash based on his locality. She says growing up that it was very common to see Linda McCartney show up with black eyes, and that it was something that you never, ever discussed with anyone, especially someone not from the village. It sounds like something from the League of Gentlemen. That was local knowledge, for local people. Despite his philanthropy, the money had to come from somewhere. Bill Gates was likened to the devil or the Borg for his highly unethical legal practices in the 90s and zeros. I remember a time when Microsoft was the big bad evil tech company buying and bullying smaller companies. Those were the days. Eric Clapton is a huge racist. I never really liked his music before I found this out, but now I like to make sure other people know this too. I used to be into dope, now I'm into racism. It's much heavier, man. Freaking wogs, man. Freaking Saudis taking over London. Bastard wogs. Britain is becoming overcrowded and Enoch will stop it and send them all back. The black wogs and coons and Arabs and freaking Jamaicans and freaking indecipherable don't belong here. We don't want them here. This is England. This is a white country. We don't want any black wogs and coons living here. We need to make clear to them they are not welcome. England is for white people, man. We are a white country. I don't want freaking wogs living next to me with their standards. This is Great Britain, a white country. What is happening to us? For frick's sake, we need to vote for Enoch Powell. He's a great man, speaking truth. Throw the wogs out. Keep Britain white. This always blew my mind, considering how many black blues artists he's collaborated into radio with and was influenced by. Maybe he changed in his later years, or maybe he lives with the dissonance and thinks, okay, I'll play music with them, but they should stay out of England. Let's not forget about Cheryl Cole. Think she has a different surname now. This Factor USA and UK judge pop starlet role mode. She shouted racial slurs and assaulted a black female toilet attendant for not wanting to pay for sweets. Steven Spielberg in the making of The List of Schindler came to Schindler's wife, which was really poor, to get information, and after the movie he paid her nothing and funded the Xenocal Schindler Foundation, earning millions for Jews affected by the Third Reich while Emily Schindler was dying alone and poor, although she did just as much as his wife to rescue people from the German genocide. From the wiki. After the film's release, Emily's close friend and biographer, Erica Rosenberg, quoted Emily in her book as saying that the filmmakers had paid not a penny to Emily for her contributions to the film. These claims were disputed by Thomas Keneally, author of Schindler's Ark, who claims he had sent Emily a check of his own, and that he had gotten into an argument with Rosenberg over this issue before Emily angrily told Rosenberg to drop the subject. 10. In his 2001 film In Praise of Love, filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard accuses Spielberg of neglecting Emily while she was supposedly dying, impoverished, in Argentina. 11. In response to Godard, film critic Roger Ebert mused, has Godard, having also used her, sent her any money, and has Godard or any other director living or dead done more than Spielberg, with his Holocaust project, to honor and preserve the memories of the survivors? From The Guardian, Keneally said that when he was researching his novel in the early 80s he received a request from Emily's lawyer that she be sent a series of questions to answer. Keneally added that he paid her an agreed sum for the information he received. Emily is also said to have received a large payment from Spielberg after Schindler's List was completed in 1993. Guessing the biographer caretaker are behind a lot of it. Funny fact about Steve Jobs, he hated people being unproductive. At Apple, if you ran into him, he'd always ask you what you'd done for Apple that day. If you couldn't give him a straight answer, you were immediately fired on the spot. A funny story erupts from this when Jobs was riding in an elevator and asked the guy next to him what he'd done for Apple that day. When the man replied with nothing, Jobs ordered him to clean his desk out. When the man tried to get a word in, Jobs began to get mad and cause a scene until the man was able to explain that he didn't even work for Apple and was just delivering a package. Thomas Edison was a cutthroat businessman with deep ties to the mob. Sure, he invented a few things, but he stole most of his credit from people like Tesla. Also, the film industry moved across the country just to get the frick away from him. They were tired of having the mob come and trash their equipment. Edison thought he owned the motion picture camera and everything shot with it. There were a few other reasons the film industry moved from the Northeast to California. Weather was one of the largest factors. California simply didn't have the awful winters of New York, New Jersey. It meant they could film year-round with natural light, which was important because even the strongest light bulbs at the time weren't good enough to properly expose film. Let's face it, New Jersey isn't always the sunniest place in the world, and a run of clouds could frick filming. Still, Edison was a frick, and his iron grip on the industry definitely played a role in the choice to move west. Imagine if every time someone wanted to paint a picture, some dude hovered over their shoulder screaming at them and stealing their money. That's Edison with film. According to the episode, Holier Than Thou, from Penn and Teller, Gandhi was a racist who slept with multiple young girls without having sex with them to test himself. That Mother Teresa made people suffer so they could get into heaven more easily. The Dalai Lama wants to return to the old Tibet in which slaves can be kept and lots of gruesome corporal punishment like eye gouging, and he was trained by the CIA. Not long after that, the Dalai Lama came out in support of democracy in Tibet, not a restoration of the religious monarchy. I assume that means an end to old style stuff like slavery and corporal punishment as well. You have to remember he's been trying to get his country back for a long time, so it's not surprising that some of the laws and customs from the 1950s are no longer acceptable today. It just took him a while to say, hey, yeah, I don't mean I want everything to go back exactly where it was 60 years ago. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.